Welcome back to the Foundation in C# course. We are currently in Module 9, and this lesson we're going to be covering the class library setup. This is just the beginning of the setup of our SQL data access. So your homework is to create a class library in the solution for our new project. Put together a simple folder structure for the classes we'll be adding. Okay, so create a class library in our solution and then set up a simple folder structure for the class you want to add. Don't go crazy, but just add a couple in there to kind of lay out and structure your class library, knowing what's coming ahead for data access. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video right now and do that. All right, so let's go ahead and get to work. Let's right-click on our hotel app solution and say Add New Project. We're going to select a C# library project and choose the class library .NET Standard version. We could choose .NET Core since everything else will be .NET Core, but by choosing .NET Standard, we allow ourselves to have more access to more platforms. Okay, so if you look at the class library .NET Standard, we have C#, Android, iOS, Linux, Mac, Windows, and it's a library. If we find the class library for .NET Core, let's find that here. So .NET Core right here, Windows, Linux, and Mac. So you're missing iOS and Android. Those are the things that a .NET Standard can also talk to. So you open yourself up to more opportunities by using a .NET Standard project, if you can. So let's hit next. We're going to call this Hotel App Library. And we'll hit create. Once we do, the first thing we do is we delete class 1. We don't need that. And now let's create our folder structure. The first thing we know we need is a models folder. So whenever you're talking to a database or getting information from a database, you're going to need a model. And a model is just a class that has a bunch of properties in it. And it's basically a way of holding data together. Now let's add another folder. I'm going to call this database or databases. And this will be where we put database code or data access code that talks directly to the database. We have a third folder here called data, which seems a little redundant, but here's the difference. The classes in the data folder are what's going to talk to the data access class in the database folder, which talks to SQL. The classes in the data folder are what we're going to talk to from our user interface. So our user interface may call a method in a class inside data, and the method might be called get available rooms. And in that method, it's going to figure out the query it needs to get that information, and then it's going to call the class in data access to talk to SQL and say, here's the query, and this is what I need. And it's going to get back a list of model. And then that method in the data that was called can call back to or send back to the user interface the data that was requested. So it's going to be a two-step process, not just a direct, let's everybody talk to SQL directly. Okay? There'll be two steps here. This data folder could actually be business logic. There's a fuzzy line here. Some people like to see this very, very clear line of data access, business logic, and user interface, and see very clear layering. But that's not really how applications work. There's usually a fuzzy line, not a very, very clear and delineated line. And so in this case, we could call it business logic because there will be a little bit of logic in play in these methods sometimes. But really some of that logic goes into SQL Server. So we may call a store procedure that has some logic to it. Not much, but a little bit. And that's actually a good thing. Some people get a little nervous about that. But really, if SQL's best job, the thing it does best, is query data or get data out of itself, then why wouldn't we give SQL that job? Why do we give somebody else the job that SQL does best? So there has to be a little bit of logic that goes into SQL because it's going to do data access the best. And so we'll have a little bit of logic there. So it's that fuzzy line. But so this could be called data access, or I'm sorry, not data access, business logic. But I think data is more clear because in our methods, we're saying, dot data. So hotel app library dot data dot, query information or something like that. Okay. So we'll come up with some ideas there. But that's what we're going to be doing with those 3 folders. And that's all we need to do for this lesson. So our next lesson, we'll come back and start working on wiring up Dapper. So come on back for that.